The silent stalker Sarah had always loved her little house. It wasn't much, just a modest two-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, but it was hers. After her breakup with Mark, her ex-boyfriend of 2 years, she'd worked hard to make it feel like her own space again. She repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and even started a small garden in the backyard. It was her sanctuary, a place where she felt safe and at peace. But lately, something had changed. It started with small things. At first, Sarah thought she was just imagining it. She'd hear faint noises at night, like soft footsteps or the creak of a floorboard. Sometimes she'd find items slightly out of place, a chair pushed back from the table, a picture frame tilted on the shelf. And then there was the food. She'd go to the fridge expecting to find the leftovers she'd saved, only to discover them missing. "I must be forgetting things," she told herself. Maybe she'd eaten the leftovers and forgotten. Maybe the noises were just the old house settling. She tried not to think too much about it. But as the weeks went on, the oddities became harder to ignore. One night, as she lay in bed reading, she heard a distinct sound, a soft thump, like something falling. Her heart raced. She froze, straining to hear more. But the house fell silent again. "It's probably nothing," she muttered, trying to calm herself. Maybe the wind knocked something over. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that she wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched, Sarah began double-checking her doors and windows before bed, making sure everything was locked. She even bought a security camera for her front door, thinking it would give her peace of mind. But the strange occurrences continued. One morning, she woke up to find her back door slightly ajar. She was certain she'd locked it the night before. Her unease grew. "Maybe I should call someone," she thought. But who? The police? What would she even tell them? That she was hearing noises and her leftovers were missing? She felt silly even thinking about it. Instead, she confided in her best friend, Megan. "You're probably just stressed," Megan said over coffee. "You've been through a lot lately. The breakup, fixing up the house. It's no wonder you're feeling on edge." Sarah nodded, wanting to believe her friend was right. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Discovering the truth one Friday evening, Sarah decided to do some cleaning. She was dusting the shelves in her living room when she noticed something strange, a small pile of crumbs near the baseboard. Frowning, she crouched down for a closer look. The crumbs formed a trail that led toward the hallway. She followed it, her curiosity mixed with unease. The trail ended at the door to her attic. Sarah stared at the door, her heart pounding. She couldn't remember the last time she'd gone up there. The attic was mostly empty, just a few boxes of old holiday decorations and keepsakes. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow stairs. The attic was dim and dusty, the air thick with the smell of wood and insulation. Sarah shone her flashlight around, her beam cutting through the shadows. At first, She saw nothing unusual. But then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. A sleeping bag tucked into the corner, along with a few crumpled food wrappers and an empty water bottle. Someone had been living up here. The confrontation, Sarah's hands shook as she climbed back down the attic stairs and locked the door behind her. Her mind raced. Who could it be? How long had they been there? She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she explained the situation to the operator. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers searched the house and attic thoroughly, but found no one. They told Sarah it was possible the intruder had left after hearing her come up. "We'll file a report and keep an eye on the area," one of the officers assured her. "But if you notice anything else, call us immediately." That night, Sarah barely slept. Every creak of the house made her jump. She kept the lights on and clutched her phone tightly, ready to call for help at the slightest sound. Uncovering the identity over the next few days, Sarah couldn't shake her fear. She installed more security cameras around the house and even bought a new lock for the attic door. But she couldn't stop wondering who had been living up there and why. Her questions were answered sooner than she expected. One evening, as she reviewed footage from her new security cameras, she saw him, Mark, her ex-boyfriend. Sarah's blood ran cold as she watched the video. It showed Mark sneaking into the house through the back door in the middle of the night. He carried a bag and disappeared into the attic. She felt a mix of fear and anger. How could he do this to her? After everything they'd been through? She called the police again, showing them the footage. This time, they took immediate action. Mark was arrested a few days later, found hiding in a nearby park. When questioned, he admitted to living in Sarah's attic for months. The aftermath, Mark's explanation was chilling. He said he couldn't let go of Sarah and wanted to stay close to her. He claimed he hadn't meant to scare her, and that he thought he could live in the attic without her noticing. Sarah was horrified. The thought of him watching her, listening to her while she went about her life unaware. It made her skin crawl. She filed for a restraining order and began seeing a therapist to help process the trauma. In the weeks that followed, Sarah took steps to reclaim her sense of security. She reinforced all the locks on her doors and windows, added motion sensor lights around the property, and even adopted a dog for protection and companionship. Slowly, she began to feel safe again. But the experience left a lasting mark. Sarah no longer took her safety for granted. She learned to trust her instincts and to take action when something didn't feel right. And while she was determined not to let fear control her life, she knew she'd never forget the silent stalker who had turned her sanctuary into a place of fear. A new beginning months later, Sarah was sitting in her backyard, watching her dog play in the grass. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over her garden. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Her journey hadn't been easy, but she'd come out stronger. She'd taken back her home, her life, and her sense of security. And as she sipped her tea and watched the stars begin to appear, she knew one thing for sure. She would never let anyone take that away from her again. The possessive ghost, a man named Tom, had been in a relationship with a woman named Claire for several years. At first, their relationship was full of happiness and excitement, but over time, they grew apart. Tom felt like they weren't right for each other anymore, so he decided to end things. Breaking up wasn't easy for him, and it was even harder for Claire. She had always been deeply attached to Tom, and hearing that he wanted to leave her broke her heart. After the breakup, Tom tried to move on with his life. He focused on work, spent time with his friends, and even started a new hobby to keep himself busy. But something didn't feel quite right. It began with small, strange occurrences. He would misplace items like his keys or wallet, and later find them in odd places he was sure he hadn't left them. At first, he brushed it off as forgetfulness. Life had been stressful lately, after all. One evening, Tom was sitting alone in his apartment, watching TV, when he felt a sudden chill. The air around him seemed to grow colder, and he couldn't explain why. The windows were closed, and the heating was on. He ignored it, thinking it might just be his imagination. But soon, the odd events became harder to dismiss. Lights would flicker on and off without reason. His phone would buzz with no notifications, and he sometimes heard faint whispers when no one else was around. Tom began to feel uneasy in his own home. The once cozy and familiar space now seemed unsettling. One night, as he was lying in bed, he heard a soft knock on the bedroom door. His heart raced. He lived alone. Gathering his courage, he got up to check, but there was no one there. That's when he started to suspect something supernatural might be happening. A few days later, Tom learned some shocking news. Claire had passed away unexpectedly. The news left him feeling a mix of emotions, sadness, guilt, and confusion. He couldn't help but wonder if her spirit was somehow connected to the strange things happening in his life. The thought scared him, but it also made him feel responsible. He thought about how their relationship had ended and wondered if she might be angry or hurt enough to reach out to him even after death. The eerie events only grew worse after Claire's passing. Tom would wake up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was standing over him. Sometimes he'd see shadows moving in the corners of his vision, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. His belongings continued to move on their own, and he started hearing Claire's voice. She would call his name softly, almost as if she were standing right next to him. "Tom," she'd whisper, sending chills down his spine. One day, Tom decided he couldn't take it anymore. He reached out to a friend, Sarah, who believed in ghosts and had studied the paranormal. Sarah listened carefully as Tom explained everything that had been happening. She nodded thoughtfully and said, "It sounds like Claire's spirit hasn't moved on. She might be holding onto this world because of how things ended between you two." Tom asked Sarah what he could do to make the haunting stop. Sarah suggested that he try to communicate with Claire's spirit. Sometimes spirits just need closure, she explained. You need to let her know that you're sorry for how things ended and that it's okay for her to let go. Though the idea made him nervous, Tom agreed to try. That night, he sat in his living room with a lit candle and spoke aloud. He apologized to Claire, telling her that he had cared about her deeply, but felt they weren't meant to be together. He admitted he hadn't handled the breakup as well as he should have, and said he hoped she could find peace. For a moment, everything was still. Then the candle flickered wildly, and Tom felt a wave of emotion wash over him. It was as if Claire was there, listening to every word. He continued, saying, "I hope you're in a better place now, Claire. You don't have to stay here anymore. It's okay to move on." After that night, the eerie occurrences began to lessen. The lights stopped flickering, the whispers faded, and Tom no longer felt a cold presence in his home. It seemed like Claire had finally found peace. While Tom was relieved, he also felt a sense of closure. He realized how important it was to address unresolved feelings, even if it meant facing something as frightening as a ghost. In the weeks that followed, Tom's life slowly returned to normal. He kept Claire in his thoughts, remembering the good times they had shared, but also understanding that their relationship had run its course. The experience taught him to be more mindful of how he treated others and to never leave things unsaid. Though the haunting had been terrifying, it had also given him a chance to reflect and grow. Tom's story became one he shared only with a few close friends, including Sarah. While some people might not believe in ghosts, he knew what he had experienced was real. Claire's spirit had stayed behind out of love and pain, and he was grateful he had been able to help her find peace. The memory of those strange, chilling nights stayed with him, but they no longer filled him with fear. Instead, they served as a reminder of the importance of empathy, forgiveness, and letting go. The dangerous obsession breaking up with someone toxic is supposed to bring relief, but for Sarah, it marked the beginning of a nightmare she never saw coming. After ending her turbulent relationship with Ryan, she hoped to move on with her life and heal from the emotional wounds he had caused. Instead, she found herself trapped in a web of fear, lies, and harassment that seemed to have no end. This is the story of how Sarah overcame a dangerous obsession and reclaimed her peace. Sarah had met Ryan at a friend's party 2 years earlier. He was charming, funny, and full of life. At first, their relationship seemed perfect. He showered her with attention, compliments, and thoughtful gestures. Sarah felt lucky to have found someone who seemed to care so deeply for her. But as the months went by, the cracks in Ryan's facade began to show. His charm often turned into manipulation, and his affection came with conditions. Ryan was possessive and controlling. He wanted to know where Sarah was at all times, who she was talking to, and why. He would read her messages and question her friendships. When she tried to set boundaries, he would accuse her of not loving him enough or even threaten to harm himself. Sarah often felt trapped, walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting him. One day, after yet another heated argument, Sarah realized she couldn't live like this anymore. The constant anxiety, the lack of trust, and the emotional exhaustion were too much to bear. With the support of her friends and family, she mustered the courage to end the relationship. She thought that was the hardest part, but she was wrong. Ryan didn't take the breakup well. At first, he tried to win her back with apologies, promises to change, and grand romantic gestures. When Sarah stood firm, he became angry and vindictive. It started with relentless phone calls and text messages, begging her to talk to him. When she blocked his number, he found other ways to contact her. He sent her emails, created new social media accounts, and even showed up at her workplace unannounced. Sarah was frightened but determined to move forward. She blocked him on every platform and told her friends and coworkers to be on the lookout for him. She even considered moving to a new apartment, but the thought of uprooting her life because of Ryan made her feel powerless. She tried to convince herself that he would eventually give up and move on, but Ryan's obsession only grew. One morning, Sarah woke up to find her social media accounts flooded with messages from people she didn't know. They accused her of terrible things, cheating, lying, and spreading rumors. Confused and alarmed, she quickly realized what had happened. Ryan had created fake profiles pretending to be her and was using them to spread lies and tarnish her reputation. He posted fake screenshots of messages, shared private photos, and made her look like a horrible person. Sarah felt humiliated and violated. She tried to report the fake accounts to the platform, but the process was slow and the damage was already done. People she hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, asking if the accusations were true. Sarah's friends and family stood by her, but the constant online harassment took a toll on her mental health. She felt like she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. As if the online attacks weren't enough, Ryan's behavior escalated in real life. Sarah started noticing someone following her when she went out. She would see the same car parked near her apartment and the same figure lingering outside her workplace. She was sure it was Ryan, but he was careful not to approach her directly. Instead, he watched her from a distance, making her feel like she was constantly being watched. Sarah's anxiety reached an all-time high. She began avoiding going out alone and stopped sharing her location with anyone, even her closest friends. She felt like a prisoner in her own life, always looking over her shoulder and second-guessing her every move. The fear was overwhelming, but Sarah knew she couldn't let Ryan control her life any longer. With the support of her best friend Emma, Sarah decided to take action. She documented everything: the fake accounts, the messages, and the instances of stalking. She filed a police report and obtained a restraining order against Ryan. While the legal process was stressful and slow, Sarah felt a small sense of relief knowing she was taking steps to protect herself. One evening, Sarah was heading home from work when she noticed a car following her. Her heart raced as she tried to stay calm and think clearly. Instead of driving straight to her apartment, she turned into a busy shopping center and parked near the entrance. She called Emma, who stayed on the phone with her until she felt safe enough to leave. When she finally got home, she double-checked all her locks and kept her phone nearby, ready to call the police if needed. The confrontation Sarah had been dreading finally came a few weeks later. She was walking to her car after a late shift when Ryan appeared out of nowhere. He looked disheveled and angry, his eyes filled with a mix of desperation and rage. Sarah's heart pounded as he started yelling at her, accusing her of ruining his life and begging her to take him back. Sarah stood her ground, refusing to engage with him. She calmly told him to leave her alone and reminded him about the restraining order. Ryan's anger boiled over, and he lunged toward her. But before he could do anything, a bystander intervened and called the police. Ryan was arrested, and Sarah finally felt a sense of relief knowing he would face consequences for his actions. In the weeks that followed, Sarah worked hard to rebuild her life. She attended therapy to process the trauma and regain her confidence. She leaned on her friends and family for support, finding strength in their love and encouragement. The fake accounts were eventually taken down, and Sarah's reputation began to heal. She even started a blog to share her story and help others who might be facing similar situations. Sarah's journey wasn't easy, but it taught her the importance of standing up for herself and seeking help when needed. She learned that she wasn't alone and that there were people who cared about her and wanted to see her thrive. Most importantly, she realized that her worth wasn't defined by someone else's actions or opinions. Today, Sarah is stronger than ever. She has moved to a new city, started a new job, and surrounded herself with positive, supportive people. While the scars of her past remain, they serve as a reminder of her resilience and courage. Sarah hopes her story will inspire others to recognize their own strength and never settle for anything less than they deserve. The double-life James had always believed he was good at reading people. As a private investigator, his job was built on instincts, observation, and connecting dots. But when it came to Claire, his girlfriend of 2 years, he had never questioned anything. She was warm, kind, and charming, with a sense of humor that could brighten even the darkest days. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, spent her weekends volunteering at an animal shelter, and had a knack for whipping up the most amazing lasagna he'd ever tasted. Life with her was simple, happy, and drama-free, or so he thought. It started with a small, seemingly harmless incident. One evening, while James was waiting for Claire to return from her weekly yoga class, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He glanced at it out of habit and saw an unfamiliar name pop up on the screen. Marcus. The message read, "We need to talk. Call me if something about it felt off." Claire rarely mentioned friends outside of their shared circle, and James had never heard of Marcus. When Claire walked through the door, James asked casually, "Hey, who's Marcus?" Claire's face froze for a split second, before she forced a smile. "Oh, he's just an old friend from college. Nothing important." James didn't press further, but the hesitation in her voice and the way she quickly grabbed her phone to delete the message stuck with him. It was unlike her to be so guarded. Normally, she was open about everything, even mundane details like what she'd had for lunch. Over the next few weeks, James began to notice more small inconsistencies. Claire would step out to take calls she claimed were from clients, but she seemed nervous afterward. Once, he found a stack of mail addressed to Elizabeth Crawford tucked away in her desk drawer. When he asked about it, she laughed it off, saying it was a mix-up with a previous tenant at her old apartment. But the final straw came one night when they were out for dinner. A man approached their table, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Claire. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low and tense. "We need to talk." Claire's face turned pale. "You must have the wrong person," she said quickly, avoiding James' gaze. The man didn't argue, but gave her a knowing look before walking away. James couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. That night, after Claire had fallen asleep, James began digging. He'd never felt the need to investigate her before, but now he couldn't ignore the growing pile of questions. Using his professional resources, he ran a background check on her name, both Claire Miller and Elizabeth Crawford. The results left him stunned. Claire Miller didn't exist. The Social Security number she had given him matched Elizabeth Crawford, a woman with a history that read like a crime novel. Fraud, embezzlement, and a suspected involvement in a high-profile theft case years ago. She'd vanished without a trace, leaving law enforcement baffled. And now she was living under a new identity right in front of him. James felt a mix of betrayal, anger, and confusion. Who was the woman he had been sharing his life with? And why had she lied to him for so long? He decided to confront her the next morning, but as he turned to head back to bed, he noticed Claire's side was empty. Her purse and car keys were gone. A cold wave of panic washed over him. Had she figured out what he was doing? Was she running away? James quickly grabbed his phone and tracked her car using the GPS app they'd installed for emergencies. The signal led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He debated calling the police, but decided against it. He needed answers directly from her. Driving to the location, James' mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Why would she be at such a place in the middle of the night? When he arrived, he parked a distance away and approached on foot. The warehouse was dimly lit, with only a few lights flickering inside. Peeking through a broken window, James saw Claire standing with a man he assumed was Marcus. They were arguing heatedly, their voices muffled by the thick walls. James crept closer, straining to hear. "I told you I'm done with that life," Claire said, her voice firm but tinged with fear. "I have a new life now. I'm not going back." "You think you can just walk away?" Marcus shot back. "You owe us, Elizabeth. If you don't come through, you know what happens." James' heart pounded. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but it was clear Claire or Elizabeth was in trouble. Before he could process his next move, Marcus grabbed her arm roughly. James couldn't stand by any longer. He burst through the door, startling them both. "Let her go," James demanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Marcus sneered. "And who are you supposed to be? Her knight in shining armor?" "I'm someone who won't let you hurt her," James said, stepping closer. "Now back off." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "James, you shouldn't be here." "I think I should," he replied, locking eyes with her. "You owe me an explanation." Marcus let go of Claire and stepped back, his expression a mix of amusement and disdain. "Fine. You want to play hero? Have fun cleaning up her mess." With that, he walked out, leaving James and Claire alone in the eerie silence of the warehouse. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then James broke the silence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. "I mean, really. No more lies." Claire took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I was Elizabeth Crawford. A long time ago. But that person doesn't exist anymore. I left that life behind to start over." "What life?" James pressed. "What were you running from?" She hesitated, then began to explain. Years ago, she'd been part of a group that orchestrated elaborate scams. They targeted wealthy individuals and corporations, stealing millions. It was thrilling at first, but the danger and guilt eventually became too much. When the group's last job went wrong, landing some members in prison and others on the run, she decided to disappear. She created a new identity, cut ties with everyone, and vowed to live an honest life. "I never wanted to hurt you," Claire said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, James. Everything we had was real." James felt torn. The woman he loved had lied to him about everything, but her fear and remorse seemed genuine. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of losing you. Scared of my past catching up to me. And now it has." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So what happens now?" "I don't know," Claire whispered. "Marcus won't stop until he gets what he wants. And if I don't give it to him, he'll come after both of us." James made a decision. "Then we'll deal with him together." Over the next few days, they worked to uncover Marcus's plan and find a way to stop him. James used his investigative skills, and Claire provided insider knowledge of Marcus's tactics. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when they both questioned if they'd survive. But through it all, they realized their bond was stronger than the secrets that had threatened to tear them apart. In the end, they managed to expose Marcus's illegal activities to the authorities, ensuring he could no longer harm them or anyone else. Claire's past was finally out in the open, and while it wasn't easy, she was ready to face the consequences. With James by her side, she knew she could rebuild her life this time with no more lies. The experience changed them both. Trust, they learned, wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing to stay and fight for the people you love, even when things get messy. And as they started a new chapter together, they knew they'd face whatever came next as a team. The game player, Emily's life had always been quiet, predictable, and comfortable. She enjoyed her routine, from her morning coffee to her evening stroll in the park. Everything changed one evening when she received a friend request on social media from someone she hadn't seen in years, David. David had been her first love, the kind of boyfriend who left a deep mark on her heart. Their relationship had ended abruptly, with little closure, and Emily had spent years wondering what might have been. Seeing his name pop up on her screen made her heart skip a beat. Against her better judgment, she accepted his request. Their messages started innocently enough, a "Hey, how have you been?" from David, followed by Emily's cautious but curious reply. Over the next few days, their conversations grew longer. David seemed to know exactly what to say to make her feel comfortable, nostalgic, and even excited. He reminded her of the good times they had shared, how much he had missed her, and how he always wondered if they would ever cross paths again. Emily felt a mixture of emotions. She was flattered, intrigued, and even a bit nervous. David was charming, funny, and attentive, just as she remembered. It felt like picking up a book she had loved but never finished. She told herself it was harmless to catch up with an old friend. After all, people change, and maybe David had too. A week later, David suggested they meet in person. Emily hesitated, but eventually agreed. They met at a cozy cafe in the heart of the city. When she saw him, memories flooded back. David looked older, but still carried the same confidence that had once drawn her to him. They talked for hours, and Emily felt like no time had passed at all. Over the next few weeks, they started seeing each other regularly. David was attentive, always knowing the right things to say. He seemed genuinely interested in her life and made her feel special. Emily began to let her guard down. It felt like a second chance at something beautiful. But soon, subtle changes began to creep into their relationship. At first, they were small things, David making suggestions about what she should wear, where they should go, or even who she should spend time with. Emily brushed it off, thinking he was just trying to be helpful or protective. Then his behavior became more controlling. He would accidentally show up at places she hadn't mentioned going to, claiming it was a coincidence. He began questioning her about her plans, her friends, and even her work. "I just care about you," he would say when she expressed discomfort. "I want to make sure you're okay." Emily started to feel uneasy, but David's charm always disarmed her. Whenever she confronted him, he would apologize, turning the situation around to make her feel like she was overreacting. He would bring flowers, write heartfelt messages, and remind her of how much he cared about her. One day, Emily noticed something odd. A conversation she had with her best friend Sarah, which she hadn't shared with anyone else, came up in a casual chat with David. When she asked him how he knew about it, he laughed and said, "You must have mentioned it." Emily was sure she hadn't. She began to notice more coincidences. David seemed to know things about her life that she hadn't shared with him. He would reference conversations she had at work, details about her daily routine, and even private thoughts she had written in her journal. It felt like he was always one step ahead, as if he could read her mind. Paranoia started to take hold. Emily checked her phone, her laptop, and her apartment for anything unusual. She found nothing. David continued to act as though everything was normal, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One evening, she decided to test him. She made up a story about an old colleague she planned to meet for lunch. She told no one else about it, not even Sarah. The next day, David casually mentioned the colleague's name. Emily froze. "How did you know about that?" she demanded. David smiled, his tone calm and reassuring. "You must have told me," he said, brushing it off. But Emily knew she hadn't. The next few days were a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Emily started to notice subtle changes in her surroundings. Her phone's settings were different. Her computer's browser history had been accessed, and she even found a small device under her kitchen table that she couldn't identify. Realization dawned on her. David had been monitoring her, watching her every move, and manipulating her life like a game. She confronted him with the device, her voice trembling with anger and fear. David didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cold. "I only did it because I care about you. I wanted to protect you, to guide you." Emily felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "This isn't love," she shouted. "This is control." David's demeanor shifted. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice sharp. "You should be grateful. I've been looking out for you, making your life better." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. She realized that David didn't see anything wrong with his actions. He genuinely believed he had the right to control her life. That night, Emily packed a bag and left her apartment, staying with Sarah. She contacted the police and a cybersecurity expert who confirmed her worst fears. David had installed tracking software on her devices and planted hidden cameras in her apartment. He had been orchestrating her life like a puppeteer, pulling the strings to suit his twisted desires. Emily felt violated and powerless, but she was determined to take back control. She filed a restraining order against David and worked with the experts to secure her devices and her home. She also began therapy to cope with the trauma and rebuild her sense of safety. Months passed, and Emily slowly started to heal. She reconnected with her friends, found strength in her work, and rebuilt her life on her own terms. David's presence lingered in her mind, but she refused to let it define her. She was no longer a pawn in his game. Emily's story became a reminder to herself and others that love should never come at the cost of freedom or safety. She learned to trust her instincts and value her independence. Though the scars of David's manipulation remained, they became a testament to her resilience and courage. In the end, Emily emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live life on her own terms.